to do the spine curl now, which is a lovely exercise for loosening up the spine and getting it feeling a lot more free and flexible. Of course, always working from the core as well. So starting in the relaxation position, remembering your alignment of your knees and your feet being hip width apart. The spine nice and lengthened along the mat, and making sure there's a little bit of distance under, if you have a head cushion, that it's not right underneath your neck. I'm going to get Vivi to show you the full exercise, and then we're going to break it down into parts. So you're going to start from a neutral pelvis. You take a breath in. As you breathe out, you do a nice pelvic curl, and then you lift the pelvis off and you lengthen the spine away from the shoulders and the neck, just up to the tips of the shoulder blades. And you stay here as you take a breath in, and as you breathe out, you bring the spine, you lengthen it along the mat, all the time lengthening it from the shoulders and the neck, and you come back in reverse until you come back to neutral. Good. I'm going to get Vivi to show you once more with her arms up in the air. You won't have your arms in the air, you'll have your arms on the mat, but just so that you can see her spine. So I want you to focus on the spine, starting from the base, going up as she goes into the spine curl and coming down in reverse afterwards. So always start with a nice deep pelvic curl first of all, and then you curl the pelvis off the mat, lengthen slowly, one vertebra at a time, until she comes to the tips of the shoulder blades. The knees are staying hip width apart, and then breathing in as she comes out, using all her abdominal muscles and the core, slowly one vertebra at a time, getting the lower back in before the pelvis comes down back to neutral, and you can bring your arms down by your side. Good. So that's the full spine curl, but we can break it down and start with little variations to begin with. Especially if you've got a slightly tight back, or if you've had any back problems, you can actually just do the first bit of it and still get lots of benefit. So the very first part is the pelvic curl, which we've covered in a separate tutorial. So if you haven't seen that, then go back to watching the pelvic curl. So starting in neutral, so I want you just to do your pelvic curl and don't actually lift anything off the mat. Okay, so take a breath in. As you breathe out, pull in all your core muscles and you curl the pelvis around. So Vivi's curl the pelvis around. Now she hasn't clenched her buttocks, so the buttocks at this stage are switched off. It's only at the next stage that the buttocks will kick in. And now come back into neutral. Good. The feet, let's just talk about placement of the feet before we go any further here. The feet have got the same amount of weight through the front of the foot as they have through the heel. Now if Vivi takes her foot away a little bit along the mat, then now all her weight is going through the heel and not very much through the foot. So when if she brings her pelvis off the mat now, she'll get a lot of tension going into the hamstring, the back of the thigh, or into her calf, and get cramp. So you always get your feet position where you feel that you can feel the front of the foot evenly placed, as much weight going through the front as you can through the heel. Also, you want to make sure that you have that tripod of connection, which we've also talked about in a previous tutorial. So you can feel the big toe and the little toe evenly placed. Your feet are not turned in nor turned out. So if you imagine that you're lying on wet sand and your feet are flat on the sand, if you just press your feet ever so slightly into that imaginary wet sand, you get the water just squeezing out. And that's really as much pressure as you need to put. You don't need to push through your feet. The feet are there as just a point of contact. So the whole movement should be nice and light. So now we've talked about the foot placement, we'll go back to doing the spine curl. So I want you now to bring up, the next one is to curl the pelvis and come up just so the pelvis is lifted, okay? So take a breath in. As you breathe out, you do your pelvic curl and just lift the pelvis till it's just off the mat. Good. Stay here, take a breath in, and as you breathe out, come back into reverse. You get your lower back in, back of the pelvis, the buttocks, and you come back to neutral. We'll do that once more, breathing in. As you breathe out, pull in your core. Lovely deep pelvic curl. Keep curling the pelvis till it just comes off. Good. Hold that there while you breathe in, and then come back in reverse You get the pelvis back down, the buttocks, and then back into neutral. All the time the feet staying nice and light, and all the time the knees staying hip width apart. If you find that your knees are shaking and they're starting to move apart, you can either get, we've got these little pads here, or a cushion, or if you've got a ball is quite nice. You just have that sense of gently squeezing it, just enough to keep it there. So keep the ball there for this one. So now I want you to come up to the base of the rib cage. So you start with your pelvic curl as you're breathing out, pulling in your core, lift the pelvis, the lower back comes off, and just to the lower part of the rib cage here. Stay here as you breathe in, and as you breathe out, then get that lower, rest of that rib cage down, the lower back, get that pelvic curl back again, so you massage the lower back into the mat, back of the pelvis and the buttocks, and back to neutral. We'll do it once more at that level. That's it, drawing in your pelvic floor, lower abdominals. Start with a pelvic curl and then curl the pelvis off just to the lower part of the rib cage. Now you see all the time Vivi's lengthening away from her shoulders and neck, so there's no tension going into the shoulders and neck. And then you come back in reverse, getting your pelvic curl back so your lower back gets into the mat before the pelvis, and then back to neutral. So now, as long as your back is okay, you're not feeling any pulling in any part of the spine, then we're going to go right up to the tips of the shoulder blades, really slowly. So start with a nice deep pelvic curl. Really isolate that pelvic curl. And then you keep curling the pelvis till it curls off the mat, lengthening the pelvis, the hip bones all the time lengthening away from the shoulders and the neck until she's in her full spine curl. Now if I was to ask Vivi to go any higher, I don't want her to lift her ribs, I just want her to lift and lengthen. Always length comes with lift. And so the ribs haven't stuck out, but the pelvis is lifted and lengthened a tiny bit now. Now when you come out, I want you to come out very slowly, one vertebra at a time. That's it. So you lay one vertebra down, you create some space before the next one, or using all these tummy muscles, get this pelvic curl back again so you get that lower back into the mat, then the pelvis comes back and you come back to neutral. That's great. So it feels really nice, doesn't it? Let's do one more full spine curl. So never be tempted to hurry. Always think that each vertebra is being moved independently, and that way you get maximum flexibility. If at any point that you find that's a point that's slightly sticking, then just stop at that point, breathe into it, see if you can go a little bit further. If you can't, then stop at that level. If you can, you just gradually lengthen it, then coming back down nice and slowly. See the feet are staying nice and flat on that wet sand. Now they're turning in, turning out. And it looks a lovely fluid movement. You're massaging your lower back into the mat as you come back down. And that looks really nice. So if we were to do it without the ball, I'm just going to take the ball away, but I want you to imagine that you've still got the ball there. And we're going to do a little exercise now to really get that sense of how light and free and easy this exercise is. There shouldn't be any tension associated with it. So keeping that image of the ball, so this inner knee connection here, then come into your spine curl. That's it. Come all the way up to the tips of the shoulder blades. Now I want you to imagine here that you have a thread from the pubic bone all the way up to the ceiling that's keeping you suspended. The feet are light, the shoulders and the neck are relaxed. You've got that pretend ball between the knees, so you're keeping that inner thigh, inner knee connection, pelvic floor, and it feels really light, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So having that sense of there's no stress, it's a very light, easy feeling. Now on your next out breath, come down. One vertebra at a time, getting the pelvic curl back again so you get your lower back. Watch that knee doesn't come away. Back to neutral. And that feels great, doesn't it? Good. So we'll talk about doing a few more variations in a minute. But that in the essence is the spine curl. So when you've got that absolutely right, then we'll move on to a couple of variations.